I had the enormous pleasure of working with Ron and Rod. I guess we worked together how many years? Like 10 years? 87 to 96. 10 years we worked together. And Rod always had vision. He just gets this community. And it was just a complete honor for me to serve alongside you. And I've got to tell you how great it was, because this morning I started, our first meeting, 9 a.m., was with his son, Andy Day. And how appropriate it is that I get to end the evening with my dear friend Rod, starting the day with your brilliant son, Andy, and the influence your family has had on the shape of this community. So Rod, when he said he was speaking tonight, I just had to be here. So let's have the presentation. And I've got one thing I'd like to say at the end, but thank you so much for everything you have done and continue to do for this community. Rod Day.
So I'm going to talk to you about the waterfront. There's been my great goal in life is to somehow get the waterfront back for West Vancouverites, for the public. And we managed to do it. We managed to do it recently. It's taken 50 years of struggle. And I want to make sure that to point out that it never would have happened without all of you. I mean, I see so many of you who fought over the years to make West Vancouver a more beautiful city and a more beautiful waterfront. So that is part of it, which I think needs to be recognized. Now, in the early decades of the 20th century, West Vancouver was a small vacation community, as you know, and there were tents and little cottages that people had coming over from Vancouver, because there was really no way to get over here, no by car, so you had to take a boat to get here. And there was a lot of tents, especially around the foot of 14th, where the boats were coming in and eventually a ferry came in. Now that's the original waterfront house. I bet you recognize it. It's, as you know, the Navy Jack House, dating to 1872. Took a little while to have more waterfront houses, but there it was. And I'm going to talk a bit later about the restoration of the Navy Jack House, and along with Mark. Now, the building of the Lions Gate Bridge began to change all that in 1938. The cars began to come in, people began to move in, and this meant that the waterfront was increasingly subdivided, built up with cottages and houses of various sorts, and there were very few parks. We had Ambleside Park in 1918, but it was only a partial park compared to what it is today. In those days, there was a slough or slough, or whatever you call it, a kind of swamp that went all the way from the water all the way to the Squamish graveyard at the Park Royal Towers. And so it was a much smaller park than it is today. And then there was the various things people used to go to the water, just basically walk down through street ends and things like that. But there really wasn't much in the way of parkland in those days, and the city kept growing. However, that began to change with the Second World War. Curiously enough, after Depression and the war, West Vancouverites became more concerned about their environment, and in 1944, the council set up a planning commission with very good people. Roy, I don't know if you've ever heard of Roy Pigeon, but he was a great West Vancouverite, Ted Baines, and they also set up a Parks Commission. And the Parks Commission got the council to hold a referendum to buy parks, because they had really no parks. And you had to get a 2/3 vote to pass the referendum, and they managed to do it. The municipality, over 2/3, voted to buy parks, and they bought 5 of them, and you'll recognize them: Dunderave, John Lawson, West Bay, Horseshoe Bay, and the expansion of Ambleside Park. So that was a major advance. And the beginning, really, I think, of a kind of change in mentality on the part of West Vancouverites, more environmentally conscious. Before that, the municipal councils had been composed mainly of real estate people and their friends, and the mayor, a guy named Field, kicked them off. And from then on, the councils began to be more environmentally conscious. Now, During the 1960s and 70s, West Vancouver began to change. People got onto it. You could get a house pretty cheaply in this community. It was a great community, and people started to move in to a point where it started to grow to 1,000 people a year, and that began to cause a lot of concerns. The apartment zone, introduced in 1959, didn't help because it helped to increase the population, but it also blocked off waterfront, as you know. And so that, again, contributed to the whole problem of access to the beach. And it was just at that time, when West Vancouver became very sought after, that huge mega projects appeared to threaten the waterfront. Tradewinds, in 1967, Tradewinds Development wanted to build this huge, I'm going to read it exactly, came forward with a $110 million proposal to build a huge development opposite 19th and 23rd Street on a reclaimed 79 acres stretching out 1,700 feet from the natural foreshore. It involved construction of 25 buildings consisting of 6,000 suites of housing for 10,000 people in buildings as high as 40 stories, all on fill dredged from Burrard Inlet. Needless to say, people got pretty upset about that. And it was defeated, fortunately, but it scared a lot of people. And then 2 years later, another one came along called Laguna Del Mar, also proposed to be built on an artificial peninsula off the Navy Jack Point at the foot of 22nd Street. Not quite as bad a Tradewinds, but almost. It too was defeated, but after a big fight. Then after that, I'm getting off the waterfront for a moment now onto Cypress Bowl, but I bet a lot of you remember the Cypress Bowl affair. It was supposed to be a great big recreational area for skiing and so forth. It turned out to be a logging operation and a real estate operation with developers connected apparently to the mafia down in the Caribbean, long story. And they planned to build a subdivision up there, 8,000 residents, 8,000 people, but there was no road up to Cypress Bowl, no electrical connections, no sewage, no nothing. But somehow they were going to do this. In the meantime, they were cutting down yellow cedar and selling it, very sought after, and selling it at a very high price. Well, my friend Ken Farquharson and other citizens got onto that, and we managed to defeat that once again. But it was a fight. I mean, this community has been based on people who fought hard, and it wasn't easy, I'll tell you. And we were really scared sometimes. In addition, there was Park Royal, British Pacific Properties, and I'm not criticizing them. In fact, I've been working well with them over the years, but in those days we were kind of worried about them because the Park Royal, also British Pacific Properties, owned 4,000 acres of land above the Upper Levels Highway, and they also owned the Park Royal Shopping Center in those days, and the Squamish people were beginning to get some of their rights, which you should have had all along, and they were talking about development in cooperation with Park Royal, and we were thinking, oh my God, this is going to be, I mean, we were surrounded by these things, that this community is going to be a major municipality of 100,000 people. And so again, another fight. Actually, I think we exaggerated the danger from Park Royal and the Squamish. It didn't turn out, but in those days, we got pretty neurotic sometimes about development. So I had just arrived in West Vancouver in 1966, and I have a little confession to make. I was American. My wife and I came from Southern California, of all places, Pasadena. And my wife came from Boston. And we had met at graduate. I was a graduate student back at Harvard, and she was an undergraduate. We met. And then I taught for a while, a couple of years in California, but then we heard news that a new university was opening up in Vancouver, and they were looking for people with PhDs, because in those days, Canada in the English tradition wasn't producing too many PhDs, so they needed them. So I got a job in the history department here at SFU, at a time when SFU was a bit, the 60s, you know, it was a bit of a scary place, but nevertheless, we really fell in love with West Vancouver, and I did two things. I joined the Citizens Planning Forum, which had just been created, and I became the president. And I also took out Canadian citizenship, my wife, in 1974. That was a few years later. I joined the Planning Forum in 71. And in those days, you could be a dual citizen. So I want to make it clear, we lost our American citizenship. We are Canadians. And vive le Canada. And I'll tell you, and we never tried to get it back, you know, because we never tried to get it back. And boy, are we glad we didn't these days. Now, the other thing was the Citizens Planning Forum. What I did when I was as president is I organized the ratepayers groups, the citizens and ratepayers groups. There was anywhere from 7 to 10 ratepayers groups across West Van. This was the time, again, people were concerned about the future, so a lot of these groups had come along. And we set them up in a kind of federation and met with council every quarter to talk about the need to keep West Vancouver a beautiful park-like community. And increasingly, this is a good example of the future where citizens and staff and councils work together to keep this a lovely community, the community that it is today. Now, this set a precedent, as I say, for long-term cooperation. Now, in 1965, council was searching for a project to celebrate the Canadian centennial. Councillor Don Lanscale persuaded council to forego several short-term projects in favor of a centennial seawalk running from Dunderave Park down to 18th Street in front of the apartment zone. Now, it's amazing when you think about this, because that meant persuading all these high-rise buildings, which had been coming up since 1959, plus some single-family dwellings, plus BC Rail, which, as you know, ran its line right along that, had to persuade them to allow a centennial seawalk right in front of their property. But Lanscale was amazing, really. And his friend, Fred Russell, who was the president of International Lands, they had built the Sea Strand apartment building, and they had all kinds of insights. So they were able to work with the other owners, and eventually they were able to get the seawalk built, at least from 24th to 19th. Not quite to 25th, not quite to 18th, but 24th to 19th, so that by the end of the decade of the 60s, early 70s, the seawalk was there. The Centennial Seawalk was there. Not quite complete, but there. So then what happened? Well, what happened was they started talking about extending the seawalk from John Lawson Park to Ambleside Park. Trouble was, there were 32 houses. It was cottage country to start with. By the 1960s, it was growing. That's what people got worried about. It was going to grow too much. They started talking about buying up the properties. First, they tried to persuade the homeowners, the 32 lots, the owners, from John Lawson down to Ambleside, but they said, no, we don't want any seawalk in front of us. So they refused. So then, and this was the council that Bob Wickham was on, along with Doreen Blackburn and Don Lanscale and Peter Jones, who was one of the great mayors that West Vancouver had the pleasure of having, said, let's buy them up. When the properties become available, we'll buy them. And we'll have the right of first refusal, and we will prevent them from upgrading in order to raise the price of the houses. Right? And that's what they did. And so they instituted a policy that would take 50 years to finish, but buying those houses one at a time. And they began to do so. One of the great decisions of all time, 1975. And one of the great councils to experience. Particularly, I would say, Peter Jones, Don Lanscale, Bob Wickham, and Doreen Blackburn were the 4 who were, I think, most ardent in this, in what they were trying to do here. Now, then the question was, as we began to acquire more lots, was exactly what are we going to do with them? I mean, it was expensive, and West Vancouver has no industry. It's just a residential community, and you're talking about a lot of money here. And so some people thought that we should, as we buy the lots, we should probably develop some of them, or partially, in order to provide money to buy more lots, keeping, of course, a waterfront seawalk. Others thought we should keep it green entirely so that when we bought the lots, we shouldn't develop them in any way, shape, or form. And this sort of multi-use debate went on for a while, and quite a while actually, and I'll be talking about the next 5 or 10 minutes about how, in fact, we managed to go green. But Quickly, just a quick point about the bus depot. I don't remember the bus depot. That was in 1986. The bus depot came down, and that was right on foot of 14th in those days. That was about 4 different lots. And so they tore down the bus depot and exposed a sort of run-down ferry building, but added about 4 more lots or 5 more blocks to the seawalk. 65% of the waterfront by then was owned by the municipality. A good sign. In 1987, I was elected to council and served 10 years until 1996, and again from 2003 to 2008. In 1987 and thereafter, I pushed very, very hard for a park designation of the waterfront lots as opposed to multi-use. The council was persuaded, and we managed to declare that the areas that we had, the lots that we had acquired, would be park. We decided on park use. We also decided to tear down each house that we acquired and essentially tear down each house as it was acquired, and then not to set up a park going all the way from Ambleside to John Lawson Park, but rather a series of smaller parks. So we quadrupled the size eventually of Lawson Park, and we also set up Millennium Park and various other smaller parks. So each time we bought a house, we tore it down and added it to smaller parks all along the way, as you know today. Let's see what I've got in the way of. That's Ambleside Park. Now that's a good idea, going back to the Seawalk, the Centennial Seawalk. The idea for that came from this walk along Ambleside Park around 1960. That's, I think, what probably inspired Don Lanscale to think in terms of a seawalk further west. Now there's your, that's what they were facing, you see, Lanscale and the rest, when that's the Pink Palace, not exactly on the waterfront, but you get the idea. The pretty powerful interest groups that were opposed to Seawalk, but Fred Russell, Don Lanscale, and the council managed to persuade them to allow the Centennial Seawalk, that running from Dunderave down to 18th Street. There you get some idea, 1970s, of how it looked. Those days, the waterfront pretty well filled with houses at that point. Not particularly beautiful houses when you think about it, but in those days we lived more simply. And but you can see along Argyle that the waterfront was being blocked off, and that forms the background for the decision to buy the lots gradually. Now, by the time I was on council in '87, the Centennial Seawalk wasn't totally built. From 18th to 19th, we had to do some more work with the owners, but we did eventually get that area. But 24th to 25th was a real problem, because the owner of that whole block was a guy named David Spencer, who lived in Europe, and he did not want to negotiate with council. We spent years trying to get through to him, and eventually he sold to a developer named Harold Kelke without consulting us. We were very annoyed. Well, what happened then is that we entered into intensive negotiations with Kelke, who turned out to be an environmentally sensitive person and good citizen. And our planner, Steve Nichols, and our manager, Terry Lester, worked out a formula with Kelke in which the district purchased the first 6 inches of land along the entire waterfront of that block, first 6 inches, thereby obtaining ownership rights involving the right to build a walkway and a seawalk along the foreshore. Kelke and his associate, architect Russell Hollingsworth, built attractive townhouses on the block facing the water, which you still see today as you walk along there from Dunderave down to 18th Street. So by 1990, the Centennial Seawalk was completed between 25th and 18th Street, and 16 lots had been purchased between 18th and 13th Streets, which meant that the public had access to most of the waterfront from really the Ambleside Park to Dunderave. And then through various arrangements with North Van, all the way to Cleveland Dam. So today, and even then, you could walk from, if you have the legs, from Dunderave Park all the way up to Cleveland Dam, a public walkway. 1990 was also very interesting in the creation of Harmony Arts. Mark Sager, Pat Banab. I was on that council too, and I have to say it was Mark and Pat who were particularly active in introducing Harmony Arts, which has been a fabulous success. Something like 150,000 people come through there now in a given summer. It's incredible. Oh yeah, and I've got a nice another little slide here for you. Oh yeah, that gives you an idea of the Ambleside waterfront there. And the ones with you can see the ones that are owned by the municipality and private. This was in 1983. The only trouble with that is the last two lots which we recently bought are listed as public, but they weren't. Those are the ones that we just bought, which Mark's going to tell you about in a little while. But other than that, that gives you an idea of what we were doing between 13th and 18th Street. Look at John Lawson Park, how now it goes from here to there. Amazing, that park. That's what it looks like today, you see. It's gorgeous. People love it. And the interesting thing about that is that you look at, there's the barbecue area. That used to be the end of Lawson Park. I know because we used to have picnic and we would have foot races. And the final the final line would be right in here. Now look at this all the way over. And then the other side too to the west. So a great achievement. And Harmony Arts, the sort of thing that people have really enjoyed over the years. There was a few arts buildings. We didn't get rid of them entirely. You'll see this is we had, what's the name of that? I can't think of it. Yeah, and a music box and ferry building, and finally the little ways, but the John Lawson House for the arts. Another thing we noticed, was 2010. I'm jumping down a bit now, but in 2010, I was after I'd retired from council, I was named to a parks master plan working group, in which we examined the entire park system, which was a tremendous task because we have 165 parks and many kilometers of trails and so forth. So that working group spent a lot of time dealing with parks. And we discovered in the process that although we had declared the lots that we had bought as parks, in fact, they had never been legally dedicated and therefore had no legal status. We even were amazed to find out that parts of Dunderave, John Lawson, and Whitecliff parks were still not dedicated. I mean, they still probably would have been parked, but you needed to dedicate them. But we also, to our surprise, found that they were not, they were zoned residential and commercial. So there it was. So we got council to deal with that. And the whole area now, I assure you, is safe. The parks are dedicated and they are not zoned commercial and residential. Nevertheless, there have been some challenges along the way, and that had to do with ancillary uses and community use. For example, the arts group had been trying for years to get hold of some land. Had to be public land because they didn't have the money to buy the land, but land, particularly in Ambleside, because they felt that in Ambleside you'd get a much bigger crowd, especially if it was built in or near the seawalk. And so they came up with an idea for a 28,000 square foot art museum at the foot of 14th Street, which is where the ferry building is. And wow, I mean, you think about 28,000 square feet as one big art museum, and that would have pretty well blocked the view as you go down 14th. Of the water and all the rest. But council had said, well, we declared that area sort of an arts plaza, and they seemed to be willing to go along with it. But oh no, as much as I liked art and the arts group and all the rest, we thought that was way too big to be putting on the waterfront. In any case, you don't put art museums or galleries on the water anymore because of humidity and tsunamis, things like that. So another big fight took place. It was an unfortunate one because, again, we sympathized with the art group, but eventually, the council decided to turn down the proposal for the arts gallery in that particular location. And I remember Pam Goldsmith-Jones, who was the mayor, another wonderful mayor that we had, announced a new large waterfront arts facility is off the table. We have certainly reaffirmed the whole community's love of the waterfront and appreciation for the councils of the last 40 years for acquisition of those waterfront lands. Again, I mentioned there were a couple of arts facilities, small ones, the silk purse, as I said, and the music box and so forth, but they were small. Anyway, the question of community use still continued. Mike Smith, our mayor from 2012 to 2018, was very concerned about the state of business in Ambleside. He thought that the business was, Ambleside was a slum, but very concerned. He thought, well, what we should do is we should build a lot of restaurants and pubs and other facilities on the waterfront in order to save Ambleside business. Another fight. And eventually council unanimously turned that down, except for the mayor who dissented. And once again, the parks remain green and with only very small buildings. Now, then the Parks Department, and I must say we've had a very good Parks Department over the years, so many good departments, decided to do a final study of what we're going to do with the Ambleside Dunderave waterfront. And again, committees were set up, I sat on them, and we decided that we would keep things small on the waterfront, and the buildings, any buildings on that waterfront would be small, that is a string of pearls, as one of the architectural firms called it. And that's pretty well where we have remained. That's the situation we're in now. And I think it's been 50 years of real success. Now, one last thing, the Navy Jack House. That's the last issue we have on the waterfront. Well, it's not a big issue because I think we all want to save it. I think it goes back to 1872. It was built by John Thomas, Navy Jack. Navy Jack means he dredged gravel from the mouth of the Capilano River, and that term is used for a dredger of gravel. So it's not Gassy Jack. He wasn't gassy. He wasn't a drinker. In fact, he was a legitimate businessman, and he owned a couple of hotels along the way. And he built a house for himself and his wife, Slavia, who was from the neighboring Squamish Nation. They had 4 children. Their descendants are still around, and they're very interested in the future of the Navy Jack House, as are members of the Squamish Nation generally. I guess the question now would, how much are we going to spend to save the Navy Jack House? And the municipality came up with $1 million. $1 million. And said, well, there was a very good group called the Navy Jack Citizens Group, of which I'm a member, and John Mawson is here, who's the chair of that group. And we tried to collect that kind of money, but we couldn't collect $1 million. And so council finally decided, well, we better let the owner have some hospitality facilities, and that meant a restaurant. So the Navy Jack House is being restored. It'll probably be ready in about a year, but there will be a restaurant alongside it. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but I'm sure Mike Smith is very happy about that. And it looks like a fairly attractive building. And it's going to have a lot of umbrellas and tables in front on the water. So to save the Navy Jack House, we're going to have a restaurant. The only thing that bothers the committee a little bit is that the house itself, the interior of the house, isn't really going to be saved. The restaurant is going to put its refrigeration units in the Navy Jack House. It leaves a little bit of room in the front, a lot of room of Savory Island where you can go and sit and have coffee. And there will be a little coffee shop there. And we are looking around for some artifacts, particularly native artifacts, to sort of decorate that front area. In addition, the outside around the house, there'll be a number of artifacts, of statues and things of that sort, particularly of the native variety. Well, that's about it as far as my talk goes. I would simply conclude, then I'm going to turn it over to Mark, that as you know, Mark's going to tell you, we just purchased the last house, 1444 Argyle, and then finally that's the last house right there. So I think I'll turn that over. I would just simply say that after 50 years, we've acquired all the houses, and we paid $7.2 million for that last lot. Can you imagine if we'd had to pay that for 32 lots? I mean, when you think about it, it's hard to imagine a more far-sighted and statesman-like policy to have done that from 1975 on, and even before that, 65 with the Centennial Seawalk. So I think we can pat ourselves in the back, and as I say, we've got Bob Wickham here, we've got Ron and Joanne, where are you, Ron and Joanne? Wood, who have been part of that long process of fighting hard, but all of you too have been part of that fight. And it's not just one or two people, but it's all of us who made this community the beautiful community that it is today. So with that, I'm going to say about Mark. Mark, when I got on council in '87, he'd already been on council, and he was in law school, and he'd been on school board before that when he was still at UBC. I mean, what were you, 18, 19? I mean, Mark is a West Van boy, believe me, back to Boy Scouts and early days. And we always worked very well together, he and Alex Spokenshire and others. But after 4 years, we had 2 years, and then 2 years in those days, the terms. And in those 4 years, I said, well, I got a career at SFU. I got to get going. I got to publish or perish. I can't go on council. And 2 young kids and all the rest. And Mark said, well, look, if you will stay on council, I'll run for mayor. There it went. God, 10 years. But it was a great pleasure, Mark. And so good to turn this over to you.
What you will see, I hope, in the next 2 weeks, and Rod, I'd really appreciate it if we could get some of your photos. We're going to do a little history montage on the fence and just remind people, it didn't always look like this. You know, I think back, and I've got a picture of Peter Jones and I standing there at the beginning of the first Community Day parade. It didn't look anything like this. And so we're going to have pictures of all of the people who have served on council on that wall. We'll have some pictures to remind people that the old bus station there was really ugly. And it makes me think, and I'm going to ask, see what you think about having a few words to describe this. You know, you look at the world today, how many consecutive governments can stick with a policy for 50 years and stick with it? And I think it is a real reflection of our community. And in the same way, just to talk about the upper lands, because Andy this morning gave quite a moving talk to council about what has been accomplished with the preservation of the old growth forest. We dedicated earlier this year thousands of acres of park. We've now completed the transfer with British Pacific Properties, and we have now created the largest urban park, according to Rod's son, the largest urban park in the world. And so West Vancouver's waterfront, we can put a tick mark, and the backdrop to Metro Vancouver is preserved, we hope, in perpetuity. And so it's been a real honor and a privilege for me to serve you in this capacity. I love our community. I love the people. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed working with Ron and Rod. We've been very blessed, I think, in our community. It's a real honor to serve you, and I hope that you can come out and say thank you to all of the people who have made this a reality. August 2nd, 5:30. And one of the dreams that Don Lanscale had, and I remember this very vividly, was he wanted to see a band shell in Ambleside Park. And so last year sometime, a couple of young people came into my office and they had designed up a band shell. And they said, we would like to raise money to build this somewhere in the community. They have the Diva Piano School, and their dream was to have classical music on the waterfront. Beautiful. I love that. So again, this is just me talking, not as a council position, but just an idea. So then I was talking to the West Vancouver Foundation, and as it turns out, Don Lanscale and one of his friends left legacy money to build a band shell. And so we could complete. Don left us well, between the two of them, there's about $480,000 available to, which would be a great start to putting up a cute little band shell. And I think it would be great for Harmony Arts. And I just think it would just a great way to enjoy our community together around music on the waterfront. So I leave you as a thought of one of the things that we'll look forward to your input and feedback on. And so thank you all so much for being interested. Thanks for coming this evening. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to be here, Rod. I just love how you maintain the history. And if you haven't, by the way, read his book, I hope everyone in this room has read Rod's book. Yeah, everyone has. Because if you haven't, I'll buy you a copy. Yeah, we can find one. Again, everyone, thank you so much. And please join us in this celebration this summer. Thank you.